honestly thought like all the Diddy conversations were over. Like I thought we were Diddy'd out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I just didn't think the fans were interested in hearing about Diddy. This documentary drops and boom, here we are.
The internet thought this story had already reached its final chapter until everything started resurfacing at once again. Old footage, past interviews, legal headlines, and renewed online discussions all colliding back into the spotlight, pulling Diddy's name straight into one of the most talked about ongoing conversations on social media. What was once considered a closed narrative after his conviction has now turned into a constantly evolving debate as viewers revisit timelines, reanalyze clips, and question how much of the public story they actually understood the first time around. But what makes this moment different is not just the resurfaced content, it's the timing. Because right when things seemed to settle, new commentary, reactions, and updates began spreading across platforms, reigniting discussions that had been quiet for years. At the same time, the internet has also brought back conversations connected to Aaron Carter's tragic passing, adding even more sensitivity and speculation into an already complex online debate. And as these two separate narratives continue to circulate side by side, audiences are finding themselves divided between interpretation, skepticism, and unanswered questions. Across YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter, creators are breaking down old clips frame by frame, trying to connect dots between events, while viewers argue over what is context, what is speculation, and what is just internet distortion over time. And just when it feels like the conversation might slow down again, another wave of clips, reactions, and commentary brings it all back into focus. So now the question isn't just what happened before. It's why this story refuses to disappear at all. And once that question hits the internet, it never really disappears. Because the moment a story starts trending again after people thought it was over, it doesn't just get watched, it gets reinterpreted. That's exactly what happened here. As clips began resurfacing across platforms, audiences didn't just consume them passively. They started analyzing them, breaking them down frame by frame, comparing old interviews with newer commentary, trying to understand what they might have missed the first time. And that's where the shift begins. Not in the content itself, but in the way people start looking at it. On one side, there are viewers who see this as nothing more than recycled internet attention cycles, old material being pushed back into relevance because algorithms reward engagement. On the other side, there are viewers who believe resurfaced content always carries meaning, suggesting there must be a reason it keeps returning to public discussion. And in between those two perspectives sits the majority of the internet, watching, reacting, debating, but never fully committing to one interpretation. Meanwhile, commentary creators quickly picked up on the renewed attention. YouTube channels started posting breakdowns analyzing why certain clips were trending again. TikTok edits began pairing old footage with dramatic audio and captions designed to spark emotional reactions. Twitter threads started building timelines that connected different moments into one continuous narrative. But what most people don't realize is how quickly context gets reshaped in this environment. A clip originally recorded years ago can suddenly feel new again, not because anything changed in it, but because the audience around it has changed. New viewers see it for the first time. Returning viewers see it differently than they did before. And commentary in between fills in the gaps, whether accurately or not. That's how perception evolves online. Not through new facts, but through repeated exposure and reinterpretation. As the discussion grew, so did the intensity of reactions. Some people began questioning why certain moments were never widely discussed when they first appeared. Others pushed back, arguing that old clips are being taken out of context and repackaged in a way that changes their original meaning. And this tension is what fuels the cycle, because disagreement drives engagement, and engagement drives visibility. The more people argue about meaning, the more the content spreads. At the same time, long-form creators began stepping in to slow things down. Some tried to provide timeline explanations, laying out when certain clips originated and how they fit into broader public narratives. Others focused on explaining how internet memory works, how old content can re-enter circulation without any new development attached to it. But even those attempts to add clarity often ended up becoming part of the cycle themselves. Because every explanation creates another angle. Every breakdown creates another reaction. And every reaction creates another response. It becomes layered very quickly. And as this layering continued, audiences began noticing something familiar. This wasn't the first time a situation like this had resurfaced. The internet has seen similar cycles before, where older content reappears, gains traction, and turns into a full-scale discussion again. Each time, the pattern is the same: initial shock, rapid engagement, widespread debate, and eventual fatigue. Then silence, until it returns again later. That repetition is what makes these moments feel bigger than they are individually. Because it's not just one video or one clip driving attention. It's the history of all previous cycles combined. And that cumulative effect creates the sense that something is always happening, even when nothing new is actually confirmed. As commentary continued spreading, audience sentiment started splitting further. Some viewers expressed frustration, saying the internet never lets anything stay in the past anymore. Others said resurfacing old content is part of accountability culture, where nothing should be forgotten just because time has passed. And then there are those who simply watch the pattern itself, less focused on the subject, more focused on how quickly attention moves. Because in today's digital environment, the speed of reaction often matters more than the content itself. A single clip can dominate discussion for hours, then disappear, then return days later with a new caption and a new audience. And each return feels like a continuation, even when it's not. As more creators joined in, the conversation became less about specific events and more about interpretation. What does this clip mean now? Why is it trending again? Why are people reacting differently than before? And those questions often lead to more engagement than the original material ever did. That's the paradox of modern media. The reaction becomes more important than the source. And once that happens, the cycle no longer needs new information to continue. It only needs attention. And that's where things start to shift again, because once attention becomes the main fuel, the story no longer needs to evolve in reality. It only needs to evolve online. At this stage of the cycle, something very specific starts happening across platforms. The same clips begin appearing in different formats. Some are slowed down. Some are edited with dramatic soundtracks. Some are paired with commentary that reframes what's being seen. And some are stitched together with completely unrelated moments to create a broader narrative impression. And the interesting part is that none of this requires new information, only new presentation. That's what keeps the cycle alive. As the discussion continues, creators begin to compete, not necessarily to change the story, but to interpret it in ways that attract attention. One video breaks down a timeline. Another questions inconsistencies in public narratives. Another focuses on audience reaction itself. And suddenly, the conversation becomes multi-layered. Not one story, but many versions of the same story existing at once. And that's where confusion starts for viewers. Because the more versions there are, the harder it becomes to separate original context from reinterpretation. Some viewers lean into skepticism, saying everything online gets exaggerated over time. Others lean into analysis, trying to reconstruct timelines from scattered clips. And many simply observe the chaos without fully trusting any single perspective. But regardless of where people stand, everyone is still engaged. And engagement is what keeps everything moving. Meanwhile, older content continues resurfacing in waves. Sometimes it appears because of algorithmic recommendation patterns. Sometimes because creators intentionally revive it. Sometimes because audiences rediscover it and share it again as if it's new. And each time it resurfaces, it goes through the same transformation. First, curiosity, then reaction, then debate, then interpretation, then fatigue, and then silence, until it returns again. This repetition is not accidental. It's structural. It's built into how digital platforms distribute attention. Content that generates strong emotional responses, confusion, shock, curiosity, disagreement, tends to circulate longer than content that resolves cleanly. And when resolution is unclear or absent, engagement cycles tend to extend naturally. That's why some topics don't disappear. They pause and reappear later in slightly different forms. As this cycle continues, audiences begin noticing something else. The conversation itself becomes the subject. People are no longer only discussing the original clips, they're discussing why the clips are being discussed at all. That meta layer is where commentary content thrives. Because once viewers start questioning the system behind the content, they're no longer just consuming information, they're analyzing the ecosystem that produces it. And that creates a second layer of engagement entirely. At this point, even unrelated creators begin referencing the trend indirectly. Not necessarily by focusing on specifics, but by discussing patterns, how narratives spread, how old clips resurface, and how quickly public perception can shift based on timing and context. And every new video adds another layer of interpretation, which adds more search activity, which adds more recommendations, which pushes the cycle forward again. It becomes self-sustaining. But something subtle also starts happening here. The emotional intensity begins to flatten. Not disappear, but dilute. Because when audiences see the same type of content repeatedly, even in different formats, the initial shock starts to fade. What once felt like breaking information begins to feel like recurring commentary. And that shift changes everything. Engagement doesn't stop, but the nature of engagement changes. Instead of emotional reactions, viewers start offering opinions. Instead of shock, they express analysis. Instead of immediate responses, they start comparing versions of the same narrative. And that's when the cycle enters its most stable phase. Not silent, not viral, but ongoing. Still active, but no longer explosive. And even in that phase, the algorithm doesn't stop pushing it. Because as long as people keep interacting, even minimally, the content continues to circulate in the background. Then something interesting happens again. The topic starts appearing alongside unrelated trends. It gets recommended next to completely different subjects. New audiences encounter it without context. And the cycle resets at a smaller scale. Because now it's not just returning to old viewers, it's reaching new ones for the first time. And those new viewers experience it as if it's fresh. That's how the loop continues. Not through repetition alone, but through rediscovery. And every rediscovery starts the emotional cycle again, just at a different point in intensity. So even when the original wave slows down, the structure behind it remains active. Waiting, recycling, reappearing. And as long as that system exists, the conversation doesn't truly end. It just shifts form. From viral moment, to commentary topic, to background discussion, to resurfaced clip, and back again. And that's where the cycle reaches its final stage, the stage most people don't notice while they're inside it. Because by the time a story has gone through every phase, shock, reaction, debate, interpretation, fatigue, it no longer exists in its original form online. It becomes something else entirely. A pattern. Not a single event, but a repeating structure that keeps reappearing in different shapes. And once you recognize that, you start seeing it everywhere. The same type of clips resurfacing months later. The same kind of debates restarting with new audiences. The same commentary formats explaining why it's trending again. And the same emotional responses playing out in slightly different ways each time. But what changes is not the content itself. It's the audience. Every new wave of viewers brings a new interpretation. People who never saw the original moment treat it as fresh. People who remember it revisit it with different context. And people who analyze it start building meaning across versions. And that layering effect is what keeps everything alive. At this point, the conversation is no longer about one specific story. It's about how stories behave once they enter the internet ecosystem. Because nothing stays static anymore. Everything gets reshaped by timing. A clip that meant one thing years ago can feel completely different today, depending on what else is trending, what context is added, and what commentary surrounds it. And that's why these cycles don't end. They evolve, then pause, then return. Sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, but never fully gone. And as this happens repeatedly, viewers begin to develop a kind of familiarity with the pattern itself. They start predicting it. They recognize when something is about to resurface again. They notice when commentary channels begin circling the same topic. They can feel when the algorithm starts pushing older content back into circulation. And once you see that pattern clearly, the illusion of breaking news starts to fade. Because you realize a lot of what feels new is actually recycled attention. Not necessarily fake, but recycled. And recycled attention behaves differently than original attention. It carries memory from previous cycles. It brings old reactions into new conversations. It builds layers instead of replacing them. And that's why certain topics never truly disappear from the internet. They don't survive because they are constantly evolving. They survive because they are constantly being reintroduced. Meanwhile, some focus on explaining it. Some focus on reacting to it. Some focus on amplifying it. And some focus on stepping back and analyzing how quickly audiences shift between curiosity and fatigue. But regardless of approach, they all exist inside the same system. A system driven by engagement loops. And those loops don't prioritize resolution. They prioritize continuation. That's why even when a conversation feels like it's ending, another version of it appears shortly after. A new clip, a new angle, a new commentary breakdown, a new audience discovering it for the first time. And the cycle begins again. But each time it restarts, something subtle changes. The intensity is slightly lower. The reactions are slightly more measured. The audience is slightly more aware of the pattern. And over time, that awareness becomes part of the experience itself. People don't just watch the content anymore. They watch the cycle. They recognize the structure beneath it. And they engage with it differently. Not just as viewers, but as participants in a repeating digital system. And that's where this story ultimately lands. Not at a conclusion, but at an understanding. That online narratives rarely end in a clean way. They fade, resurface, mutate, and return. Not because they are unfinished, but because the system that carries them is continuous. And as long as attention exists, the cycle continues with it. So when you see the same conversation come back months later, in a slightly different form, with slightly different reactions, it's not an exception. It's the rule. And maybe that's the real story behind all of this. Not what happened in any single moment, but how quickly moments become cycles. And how cycles never really stop. They just wait for the next wave of attention to bring them back. And that's where this conversation leaves us. Not with answers, but with awareness. Because once you understand the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. And just like that, we reach the end of this breakdown, but not the end of the conversation, because stories like this never really stay finished in the online world. They pause, they resurface, they get reinterpreted. And every time they come back, they bring a new wave of opinions, reactions, and debates with them. And that's exactly why your perspective matters here. Because at this point, it's no longer just about what you watched in this video, it's about how you interpret the cycle behind it. The way old clips resurface. The way commentary reshapes meaning. The way audiences split into completely different viewpoints over the same material. So the real question is simple. Do you think the internet gives old stories a second life because people are searching for truth, or because attention itself never really moves on? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those topics where every opinion adds a different layer to the discussion. Some people see patterns. Some see coincidence. Some see recycled content. And others see a constantly evolving media ecosystem that never stops reshaping itself. And if you've been following this kind of content, the breakdowns, the reactions, the deeper dives into how online narratives form, you already know this space moves fast. So make sure you like the video if you enjoyed this style of breakdown, because it helps push more content like this to viewers who are following these conversations. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analysis, because by the time most people see these stories, they're already entering their next cycle online. And turn on notifications, because in this space, the next wave doesn't wait, it just appears. And when it does, we'll break it down again together.